about to go to war over Taiwan and all these things, or fighting for AI dominance, but actually it's just a big pretend game that people are playing, and I think people forget that.
Yeah, I think that's true to a very great extent. The notion of the competition, especially between global technology firms, is rather silly. I mean, you got the kind of American tech self-styled techno kings that I write about quite a lot. So a lot of people might be familiar with the PayPal mafia, So uh, Thiel, Anderson, Musk, Sam Altman, Palmer Luckey, these guys. They are selling a narrative based on the notion that there is this technological race for supremacy, especially with AI development.
Good morning, Ian. Thank you for joining me. Glad the internet's finally working.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much for having me, Tom.
So, I want to start off with your journey a little bit. I'm fascinated. So, from what I understand, you started off in a background of helping people with substance abuse and mental health issues, and then you sort of ended that part of that chapter of your life, and then went into independent journalism. And I'm wondering, it's always fascinating to hear how people got started with their own sort of journalistic practice.
Yeah, no, I worked for most of my life in health and social care. I worked in both the public and the private sector, and I specialised on working with adults with mental health issues, and then that became working more and more on people. There's a thing called dual diagnosis where you've got substance use is quite high amongst people with mental health issues. They tend to self-medicate quite often, and that can lead into further problems with substances. So I ended up specializing more in working with people with substance misuse issues, and ended up working for mainly in the private sector. But towards the end of my time doing that, I worked in the public sector, which made me realize, um, I think well, with anything, when you're working in frontline services with people, it's quite high that people get burnout, and I was certainly at that point. And so I'd already started writing, and then, but just for fun, just out of interest, just because of what I was. And I've always written. I've always been written all my life, but I was doing it on a blog, um, and then I got made redundant, which is a habitual, perennial problem with when you're working in those kind of services, because it's all goes on funding cycles. So depends, especially if you're in the private sector, you lose funding, which is why I ended up working in the public sector, because the project that I was working on was the funding was removed. And I just thought, well, can I give this a go? Can I do this? Could I do this? Could I earn a living from this? I had a little bit of redundancy money, enough to see me through for about 6 months. So I thought, right, I've got 6 months. I'll give this a go. I did a vocational training course as a journalist, just to kind of get up to speed with journalistic practice, really, and the do's and don'ts. Trying not to get sued.
Mm.
Uh, and then I, and then I and then I thought, right, okay, I'll give it a go, and I started writing more seriously and more often. And then fortunately, a couple of outlets, UK Column, The Off Guardian, um, and now I'm very fortunate to write for Whitney Webb's Unlimited Hangout, and Geopolitics. And basically, it snowballed a bit, and people started picking up and sharing my work, which enabled me to make a go of it. So I was fortunate. And even though that was about 10, 12 years ago, something like that, I do wonder today, had I started that today, would I have had the same ability to get my work noticed and out there? Because I don't think I would, because increasingly the so-called independent media is just as controlled as the mainstream media. So I mean, I think it would have been harder if I'd have started doing that now. to
Mm.
get it off the
Yeah,
ground.
I do hear a lot about that, but I don't because I follow independent journalists myself. I mean, like yourself and Whitney Webb and Johnny Vedmore, Mike Benz, and I hear a lot about this sort of infiltration of corporate interests or intelligence agencies into independent media, which makes sense because it seems like everyone knows that that's the way everything is going. I'm curious, like, what specifically have you seen with regards to that? Because it's something I've heard about, but I don't fully understand.
Yeah, I mean, the argument is the controlled opposition argument. So the idea being, and of course, this is extremely common in the mainstream media. I mean, almost it's not. I mean, I would argue that you can't really call it controlled opposition in the mainstream media because for example, when the Guardian posts articles on behalf of the Gates Foundation, at least it just says this content is sponsored by the Gates Foundation. So I mean, it's not as if they're necessarily hiding anything. I think when you've got a state broadcasters like the BBC, the clue is in the name. They're state broadcasters. So it's not they broadcast for the state. I mean, it's as simple as that, really. So you know the idea of controlled opposition, which is often attributed to a misquote, actually, whether Lenin actually said, um, I think I'm paraphrasing here, but the best way to secure victory is to lead the opposition ourselves, or quite I can't quite remember the precise misquote, but it is a misquote anyway. Um, uh, to my mind, because of the way that the work that I do, and something that I constantly reiterate and stress in my own work, is that I look at evidence, I do research, I conduct research, I look at the evidence, and I report the evidence, but also my opinion based on that research. But I always say this is my opinion based on the evidence. Now, what I do, and what a lot of independent journalists do, which the mainstream media journalists rarely, if ever, do, although I have noticed that they started doing it a little bit more, is provide the reader access to that evidence. So I link to it. If I quote a paper by an academic institution, I will link to that paper. So hopefully, readers that are sufficiently interested could go and have a look at it for themselves. And I think that's the point that I keep trying to stress is it's not up. And I don't mean this in any kind of. I'm not disparaging my readers in any way because I'm very fortunate that my readers are the kind of people that would do this anyway. But I am suggesting that the responsibility for deciding what you think about the information that you consume is down to you as the individual. It's not down to me to tell you what to think or anybody else to tell you what to think. And so I do kind of question the whole controlled opposition. What is the point of it? I mean, some of the people that have said, for example, if you take someone like Tucker Carlson, who is widely considered to be a CIA asset, and with good reason. I mean, he's got
His dad
very
was in the
close links to
CIA,
the
right? Yeah.
CIA, so yeah, and he's got personal links to them. But nonetheless, he's a journalist that's putting out stuff. You don't have to believe him. There's no. You don't have to just take everything he says as gospel. You can take I mean, I sometimes listen to some of his. I mean, he did a very good interview with somebody that I'm an economist and that I kind of cite quite oftenly, Richard Werner. He did a very good interview with him. So I mean, I was thought right now, well, that's a really good interview that Tucker Carlson has just done there with Richard Werner. But that doesn't mean that I therefore follow Tucker Carlson or believe what Tucker Carlson says. I mean, to be frank, I don't care what his opinions are because his opinions are not my opinions. They're separate. So, I mean, I think what I constantly try to stress to my readers is that I'm not saying I am right and that I should be believed. I'm just saying, here's the evidence. Here's what I make of it. You make of it what
Mm,
you will.
mm. Yeah, there's that. I can't remember who said it, but there's the saying that you won't agree on 100% of anything with anyone, including your former self. Right? If you go back 5 years in time, you'd have an argument with yourself about the most basic things. COVID would probably potentially be one of them. I like people like Tucker Carlson. It is definitely that thing where it's like, yeah, not every single thing they're putting out is mainstream propaganda slop. But what is it? People are talking about that with Joe Rogan now. Is like he's probably, had quite a few people on who are part of the CIA or intelligence agencies, and they go on and they spout some nonsense, and he might buy a little bit of it, but it's that trickle in. It's that word that I think potentially you've used quite a few times, and I have heard it, but I only realized recently what it means is limited hangout. Is that thing of like, oh, you're sort of exposed, so you reveal some of the
Yeah,
truth, not the whole truth, which it seems to be kind of prevalent to everything that's going on right now. And there is, yes, there is infiltration of intelligence
yeah,
agencies, but now I'm curious with, it seems like we're going a bit overt, certainly in Britain, with how we're controlling the news. And there's this new, I believe it's called the Trusted News Initiative or something like that. Have you heard about this?
yeah. I mean, that was set up that was set up a few years ago, and that's a kind of a global public-private partnership, which is something I write about quite a lot. So it's a partnership between various news outlets, international news outlets. I think it was set up by the BBC, and it's to and also various government departments and so forth, and they very closely linked to the United Nations. But the idea is, and it came out when the British government led this initiative called the Rapid Response Mechanism. So the Rapid Response Mechanism was an agreed kind of Anglo-American sort of agreement that when an event happened, whatever that might be, the blowing up of Nord Stream, say, so when there would be an official narrative, and the official narrative would be agreed by all parties, and everyone would push the same narrative, and that would be a rapid response to whatever that event was, and it would be agreed, united front, between all the governments that were involved. And the Trusted News Initiative was set up to, well, basically to be the outlet for the rapid response. So, it's the large international news organisations and the state media working with various states, in order to put forward a cohesive propaganda narrative. And I say propaganda because, in essence, well, I mean, that is the definition of propaganda. It is a narrative that's put forward for socio-political or socio-economic reasons, not necessarily one that's based on an appraisal of the
Mm, mm, mm.
evidence.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe I misspoke there because I do know what you're talking about, Trusted News Initiative, and there's all the recent. I think there's a Supreme Court case at the moment where they're talking about internews and the whole USAID thing and every offshoot of USAID and intelligence
Mm.
propaganda. I was talking about something a little bit more recent, and it's British based. Maybe it's not the Trusted News Initiative, but it's like the Trusted Sources something amendment or something where they're talking about raising the profile of the
Ah, well,
BBC and ITV on YouTube and Google searches and pushing
yeah,
other
yeah, yeah.
things down.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they've always been doing that. I mean, I mean, they're just kind of, more openly kind of talking about it now. But they've been doing that for years. I mean, during COVID, I don't know whether you remember, there was a thing called the Great Barrington Declaration, which was it was a group of scientists and doctors who challenged the lockdown narrative. Their view was that herd immunity was the right way to go. That was their view. And the Great Barrington Declaration, it got quite a lot of support. I think there was something like 750,000 people in total signed up to it. And obviously, most people would find that, even then, most people would find that from the internet. They'd go on the internet to find it. Certainly wasn't promoted in the mainstream media. Uh, the Guardian in particular absolutely attacked it and said all the people that leading it were, so these are some of the leading epidemiologists and and physicians in the world, and the Guardian said they were conspiracy theorists. So this is the kind of level that we can expect from the mainstream media, I think. Commonly, not all, but commonly, and and Google de-indexed it. Google removed it from the search results, and now that was down to a thing called the now I can't remember the name of it now.
That's all right.
I'm terrible with names unless I've
I'm the
got it
same.
written down in front of me. But that was down to it. That was down to an absolutely to a government-led propaganda operation. That the guy that was in charge of it openly stated that we worked with Google to remove it and to put our results at the top of the Google search results. Well, you can't work with Google to do that. That's nonsense. You can't, if you were Price Waterhouse Cooper, you couldn't spend enough money to remove something from the top of the Google search result, the organic Google search results, and put your content on top of it. It would cost you. Well, you just couldn't do it. The algorithm is not. It wouldn't enable you to do it. That kind of search engine optimization would take months, and it would cost a lot of money. So to get it done in a couple of days, which is what he said they did, just meant that Google had agreed to go along with it. So Google had fixed their own search engine results on behalf of state
Yeah, yeah.
propagandists.
I mean, that was the whole thing with Matt Taibbi and the Twitter files, which I constantly reference to people because they don't know about any of that and was sort of moved on. And the thing that I always find it quite hard is the context, right? Is like when you talk about COVID now, if you believe the mainstream narrative now, trying to explain Fauci and the history of what he's been trying to do for years and what's covered quite well in the RFK book and HIV, for example, is so hard. People don't want to listen to you because it's just there's such a long running history of it, and I sort of worry. It seems like what's the thing that I've been trying to keep up with now is what's the next Twitter files. It seems like what's happening now is there's all this, particularly in Europe, it seems like it's becoming a problem in the US. There's all this government regulation of social media websites. There's a fantastic cartoon I think Mike Benz talked about. I don't remember what website it was on, some news website, and it's Uncle Sam sitting with someone who looks like Mark Zuckerberg, and they say, "How do you want your government propaganda wrapped?" And it's either you've got two different types of wrapping paper, and one is like child protection, and so it's little like kids' toys, and the other one is like anti-terrorist, whatever. And it does seem like we're just shifting towards this tyranny. I've heard you say this before that you don't. Protest because you did I think a speech recently on digital ID, but you don't tend to protest because you don't think it's worth protesting things that are, I guess, inevitable, is something along the lines of what you said.
I No, what I said was I don't personally think it's worth protesting against the government
Okay.
because in my view the government are not in charge. It's like it's pointless protesting against the government because it doesn't matter who is said to be leading the government. Or, the old adage, it doesn't matter who you elect, because whoever you vote for, you'll get the government. So personally, I think the people that are setting the agenda, the policy agenda, are doing that from a central globalist place. If we look at sustainable development, how that has been rolled out globally. Governments haven't set the policy agenda for sustainable development. That was set at the UN level. And the UN is an avowedly oligarch-led institution. It was designed by the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and all the other Anglo-American establishment oligarchs that set it up because their initial project, the League of Nations, hadn't quite panned out as they'd hoped. So I mean, and the amount of documentation and the amount of opinions that have been put forward by various research projects, such as a very interesting one is the 1956 Rockefeller Special Studies Project, which was a kind of rather sprawling study project that was set up by um, oh God, there we go, names again. I wanted to say Anthony Fauci, but that would
Mm.
be totally ridiculous. Because anyway, it doesn't matter. Um, but But yeah, I mean, in that they openly said that they wanted to position the United Nations as the kind of global hegemon, and it should that would enable them to set policy at a global level, which is what they've done in subsequent years. So governments are not on the big issues. I mean, I think if you vote for a government expecting that it might tweak, you know, policies at the edges, they might have a slightly different approach uh, to things like building regulations and stuff like that. But other than that, they're not on any of the big issues, like whether we're going to go to war or not. Governments don't make that decision. That's not in my view. But yeah, I spoke at the digital ID rally because the point of it was not to protest about the government against the government. The point of it was to highlight the kind of things that we need to do in order to resist the changes that are coming, no matter who you vote for. So, we're certainly seeing, the unification of the state with the private sector. I mean, if we look at things like the Online Safety Act, it specifically says in the Online Safety Act that the purpose of it is to protect the mainstream media, to basically censor the independent media and independent outlets. Now that comes directly from the UN. The United Nations in 2017, 2018, no, and another document they put out in 2022, which was before the enactment of the Online Safety Act, they spoke about what they called an infodemic, which is something that was echoed by Tedros at the World Health Organization when with COVID, because he said that the infodemic was worse than a global pandemic. So he's talking about the free sharing of information, which from the UN, because the World Health Organization is obviously uh, a specialist agency of the United Nations. From their perspective, the open and free sharing of information was more dangerous than what they claimed to be a global pandemic. Now, in that document, in the other document that I'm referring to, the 2022 report from the United Nations, they said that the what they call the news the keepers of news and information, they called them the gatekeepers, and they were referring to mainstream media, academia, scientific institutions that follow their lead. They called them the gatekeepers of news and information, which was under threat, they said, from what they called non-traditional actors, which means everybody else, anybody that questions their claimed authority and their and their edicts. That's the non-traditional actors. And so the whole emphasis and drive for the many kind of initiatives and campaigns that the UN have put out has been to shut down freedom of speech and freedom of expression. They openly advocate for it. And now we see a slew of legislative moves in the UK, the US, everywhere, the EU. We see the same legislative moves everywhere, consistently coordinated everywhere, and not just there. I mean, Russia, China, just the same. There's a global coordination of a push to silence dissent. It's as simple as that. And I mean, it's funny that you should mention, the lessons that people perhaps you'd feel that they didn't learn from COVID. One of the main lessons that people have not learned from COVID that still, I find remarkable is that quite obviously it showed global coordination. You can't have the same policies, and this is another point, the same incorrect and perfectly wrong policies in every country around the world simultaneously without that being coordinated. That policy, so we're talking about domestic government policy in nearly every country around the world, being the same in one moment. It's all the same. That the only way that happens, there is no way around this. The only way that can possibly happen is through a system of global coordination. There is no other way that that can
Yeah,
possibly
this is one of
happen.
the things you've been writing about recently that I've really enjoyed because it's so easy to sort of think that you've got your eye on the ball and you know what's happening in the world, and then kind of lose the attention again. And I'm specifically referring to you talking about the collaboration between China and America, and I think Elon Musk in there as well. That sort of looks like it's a multipolar sort of fight for dominance, but it's actually just kind of tech elites taking over, having a bigger GDP than a lot of countries in the world, just sharing and pretending like it's all this big fight, but actually just sharing resources. You hear about that with like Google, and Google sort of amending its search results and silencing and putting up censorship in China because it doesn't care. It's just there to make as much money as possible. And it is that really easy thing to forget that it looks like what we're seeing in the news is this big split and sort of we're about to go to war over Taiwan and all these things or fighting for AI dominance, but actually it's just a big pretend game that people are playing, and I think people forget that.
Yeah, I think that's true to a very great extent. The notion of the competition, especially between global technology firms, is rather silly. You got the kind of American tech self-styled techno kings that I write about quite a lot. So a lot of people might be familiar with the PayPal mafia, So uh, Thiel, Anderson, Musk, Sam Altman, Palmer Luckey, these guys. They all Larry Ellison. Let's not forget Larry Ellison. Um, they you know they are selling a narrative based on the notion that there is this technological race for supremacy, especially with AI development. But I recently looked at, for example, the adoption of DeepSeek. DeepSeek AI, obviously a Chinese-led AI initiative, uh, that had hitherto used NVIDIA uh, processors. NVIDIA, it was based on development. Its core processing was based on NVIDIA chipsets, which obviously it has to get from the US. Now, so that was happening for years. DeepSeek wouldn't have done any development at all over the last 5 or 6 years were it not for the chipsets it was buying from the US. But we're supposed to think that there's this competition between these tech firms. And Jensen Huang, I would definitely include in this kind of extended group of Silicon Valley based oligarchs. Um, and then DeepSeek has more recently moved to using Huawei or Huawei. I can never say it. Huawei
Huawei. Yeah.
chipsets. Huawei, yeah. Um, as recently moving to those chipsets. So you think, well, people like Elon Musk are saying, well, this is because there's competition between DeepSeek and blah blah blah, and us, and we're in this AI race. However, the people that were most excited about DeepSeek V4, which is this particularly good for developing what they call agentic AI, which AI agents with these kind of autonomous decision making algorithms. The people that were most excited about that were Nvidia, because Nvidia have been working on that and they couldn't wait. They've written blog posts on it, right? They couldn't wait for DeepSeek V4 to come out. And when it came out, they were all delighted because it seamlessly integrated into everything they were doing. And one of the interesting things that they said was that they were using, I can't remember whether it was Anthropic or Claude, but they were using one of these AI models. I think it was Claude. Um, and they said, "Great news, guys! Great news! You can literally swap out the Claude modules for the better DeepSeek V4 modules. They are 100% compatible." Well, of course they would be, because they've been developed as a transnational partnership. It's obvious. I mean, one of the I never ceases to amaze me. This one, Trump was going on about this AI war, right? And he was going that, he made a great big sort of grandstanding statement, as he is prone to do, about not allowing the Chinese to have access to American technology, and said that we won't allow Nvidia to carry on providing these chipsets to companies like DeepSeek. We won't allow it. And as he was saying that, uh, he signed up to what he called the American United Arab Emirates AI Acceleration Program. So he signed up to that, where they've got in the United Arab Emirates, they've got this AI development hub. And he agreed a kind of unrestricted and limitless supply of US technology, including NVIDIA chips, to this UAE hub, while he was saying that, we're in competition with the Chinese. But the UAE hub is 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 one of the global centers for the development of DeepSeek. So the Chinese didn't. So at that point, Trump could stand up on the political stage, and going back to what we were saying earlier about this disparity between what is said and what is actually happening. Trump could stand on the global stage and say, we will not allow exports of NVIDIA chipsets to the Chinese, while meanwhile, providing the Chinese companies didn't need to import NVIDIA chipsets from the US, because they could just get them directly from the UAE hub, which is one of the basis of their development operations.
Great. Yeah, it does. It does feel like we know less and less of what's actually going on most of the time. I want to shift a little bit, just because you kind of mentioned the Middle East there, and you've been talking recently a lot about what you call USREAL, which is a nice little acronym. Sort of, I don't know if that's an acronym, if that's the right word for it, but smashing two words together. Um,
Neologism.
Neologism. Thank you. And this Section 219 that's currently being debated in the United States. What is it all about? What it seems like people are on one side or another. They're either like, this is the most ridiculous thing we've ever heard, sort of combining US and Israel intelligence and military, or people are incredibly for it. I don't understand it. I don't understand why it's happening. I can't remember, was it Thomas Massey seems to be completely against it and gets shut down at every turn. What's going on here in your opinion?
Well, it wasn't me. Yeah, first of all, it wasn't me that coined that. It was actually James Corbett, and I referenced James Corbett's article on it. And he came up with the term US rail, or US rail. Um, and originally it was Section 224 of the annual renewal of the National Defence uh, Authorization Act, which is something that habitually goes through the legislature in the US annually. And it's a renewal. Now, one of the problems is that Trump is asking for a $1.15 trillion defense budget, um, which is orders of magnitude bigger than anybody else's anywhere in the world. And most of that is being hoovered up by these Silicon Valley oligarchs, AI corporations, Palantir, Anthropic, OpenAI. They're getting the bulk, and weapons development. So companies like Palmer Luckey's Anduril, are getting these uh, enormous multi-billion-dollar contracts for weapons development. Um, and so the point of Section 224 is to, and which has now been renumbered 219, um, is to, I think from my perspective, the key part of it is the comprehensive data sharing agreement that's within it. So what they're basically saying is that US defense data, Pentagon-based defense data, should be shared one to one and reciprocally with the Israeli defense data sets. So they're talking about the homogenization of data sets between the Israeli defense sector and the US defense sector. They're also talking about supporting collaborative working, which means which is rather a moot point, really, for the Silicon Valley oligarchs companies like Palantir, because they've already got strategic agreements with the Israeli defense sector. I mean, they're deeply embedded with Unit 8200, which is the Israeli um, signal intelligence unit. And if you look at Israeli 8200, it's got what it's called its alumni. So people that have been through Unit 8200 training in uh, in Israel. I mean, a big part of it, obviously, of Unit 8, I mean, when you look at it and stand back and look at it, a big component of what they learn is not only kind of technological development and development of advanced weapon systems and AI and so forth. Sure, they certainly learn about all of that, but also business development. They also learn about how to be entrepreneurs and how to go on to success. Because if you look at companies, around the world, the number of technology startups that have been created by former Israeli Unit 8200 alumni, such as Wix, for example, the company Wix, um, is immense. Now, what these guys do, the Silicon Valley oligarchs do, is they're very much into this notion of accelerationism, which is an aggressive form of investment in startup companies, specifically those that they consider to be likely to create what they call disruptive technology. So the amount of there's one of the original startup accelerators was this company called Y Combinator that Sam Altman led for a few years and Peter Thiel was deeply involved with. And they've invested in if you cross-reference the Unit 8200 startup companies with investments that have come from these guys in the US, going back more than a decade, um, the crossover is enormous. They've obviously been working with each other for a long, long, long time. So really, the US rail thing I mean, I kind of view it as a kind of formalization of something that already exists. It's kind of saying, it's putting it out there and saying, right, let's be honest, we've already got this joint US Israeli network. Let's just formalize we will formalize putting it on the books. Let's put it on the books and give it a proper budget.
Right, 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 right.
They don't really need to give it a proper budget because the US have got, I think it's something like, is it 28 trillion? It might be 28 trillion. I might have got that wrong, but it's in the trillions of dollars that's unaccounted for anyway. So I mean, that there's, the US defense budget has got trillions of dollars that are missing from it that are not accounted for. So it's quite obvious where that money's been going. So at the moment, there has been some resistance for it because in order for it to progress through the Senate, the next stage of the Senate, I think the required vote passes 60 votes. Well, it didn't get that. There's been but for purely political reasons, the Democrats have voted it down in the Senate. I think it still passed a majority vote. It was 50 to 46, but it didn't get the required minimum 60 votes in order to continue. Now, what they're trying to do, quite obviously, the Democrats are trying to do, is horse trade with the Republicans. Uh, they're not talking about stopping uh, Section 219 going through. They're just using that as a lever to try and get more influence over the budget, the $1.15 trillion defense
I
budget.
always forget the term for that. I forget because I always say gerrymandering, but gerrymandering is where you sort of redraw like county lines in favor of voting. But I forget what it's called when you sort of like fight with each other to get whatever you want in a bill.
Corruption.
No, there's like there is a specific like American term. I just can't remember. Yes, corruption is a good sweeping term. Oh wow, that's crazy. So okay, yeah, I mean the Pentagon. What they've had like 6 or 7 audits that they haven't passed a single one of them, and it turns out there's loads of black budget money going nobody knows where. I guess a lot of that is speculated that it goes into like UFOs and UAPs, but that's a different conversation. So this 8200 is essentially like a sort of a high up section in the IDF where they're essentially doing the same thing and getting into finance and things like that as well. Is that, yeah, similar to how, I guess, well, I was actually chatting with James Corbett the other day, and we were talking about how that basically every major uh, technology, I'll say, company in the US seems to have had connections at the beginning with defense intelligence, Oracle, Palantir, sort of like startups in intelligence. And then I was looking into Google, and Google's really fun because if you go, oh, did Google have its starts in intelligence? Because I'd heard that somewhere before. And it goes, no, but it won some sort of a grant or a competition that was funded by NASA and DARPA. And I was like, oh, that's fine then. No connections whatsoever.
And it had funding from InQtel.
Ah, okay.
So, I mean, yeah. So I mean, Google came. It was a DARPA project. I mean, but I mean, um, yeah. I mean, when you look at this stuff, one of the things that I rail against with these Silicon Valley types, especially people like Peter Thiel, is they sell themselves as libertarians, right? And they're always going on about the free market and and how important it is that the ideas that come out of the free market dominate. Yet, as you quite rightly said, when you look at their companies, the only reason that and don't forget also, at the same time as saying they favour the free market, people like Peter Thiel have written books about the advantages of monopolies. Right? You can only a monopoly can really make a difference. You have to establish monopoly through competition, they say. But the monopolies that they've established, such as the monopolies that particularly Palantir and Oracle have got over data, certainly both public and private sector data in the US, um, is because they've got extensive partnerships with the state. I mean, Palantir came, I think, for the first 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years, Palantir's sole client was the CIA. I mean, that was its only customer because it came directly out of a CIA project called the Information Awareness Project, which was started by a guy called John Poindexter, who was previously hauled over the coals, although subsequently his conviction was quashed for his deep involvement in the Iran-Contra affair. So these are the people that are. I mean, the Information Awareness Project was basically a government initiative to surveil and spy on every single US citizen, which, another thing that I talk about is these people don't always. The oligarchs might come up with the plans, but they don't always go according to plan. So the mistake they made was allowing this to become public knowledge. And when the American public found out about it, they were not happy about it, as you might imagine. And that ended up with it publicly having its funding withdrawn. The Information Awareness Project had its funding withdrawn in 2003 because of public disquiet and anger. So they just made it go dark. So Palantir just stepped in and took it over, and Palantir ran it as a private sector operation. So that and that's obviously got the advantage of there's no freedom of information laws when it comes to finding out what a private company's doing. And since then, I mean, I actually look at that as a bit of a watershed moment, actually, because the private sector has always been involved and worked with. I mean, you can go, even if you go back to, the Manhattan Project, for example, there were a lot of private companies that were privy to what was being developed that were, IBM and so forth. But they obviously were working in partnership with the state, and in a war setting, a lot of people would accept that, that seems reasonable. But in that 2003 moment when Palantir took over the Information Awareness Project, that was a moment where the private sector became the dominant player, in my view. That was the moment at which don't get me wrong, the private sector's always been very, very influential, but it's like it officially became the dominant driving force behind a lot of what most people consider to be public sector operations. And since then, the private sector's dominance of the public sector has become has not only grown, it's become, notably, it's become more overt. Notably, I mean, I think it was in 1998 that the UN said that they had been a quiet revolution at the UN, and that it was no longer concerned with just the activities of governments, but the activities of business, and that its purpose it existed was to create business-friendly, enabling environments for for private sector innovation. So this had been happening again. You see the same pattern. You see ideas and policy initiatives coagulate at the global governance level, which then subsequently manifests at the national, local, and regional level as the adoption of different kind of policies. In this case, that moment in 2003 when Palantir became really the dominant force in the US intelligence
Yeah,
community.
the thing that gets me is like we get kind of used to something, and then it gets to the point where we say the quiet part out loud. And the best example I can give for that is the NSA, sort of WikiLeaks, Snowden scandal when that all broke. And then they sort of convinced people, oh, well, if you've got nothing to hide, then you shouldn't be worried about the government spying on you. And to this day, that's what most people say. They go, "Well, I'm not hiding anything. I'm not a terrorist, so I don't. Why do I care?" Like, and everyone's used to it now. There's memes and jokes online of the NSA agent staring at you, watching porn through your phone or whatever it is, and people just kind of slowly get used to the idea that actually, oh yeah, this has been going on for a long time. And eventually they just say the quiet part out loud. I don't remember if it was, I think it was Peter Thiel in a previous conference that was saying something about, I always forget if it was Peter Thiel or someone else, but talking about like police body cams and the whole thing of like, oh yeah, well, we say that you can turn them off, but you can never really turn them off. They're always on. And if someone can get a warrant for that, then they'll watch you shitting yourself in the toilet, because it's never really, it's the panopticon thing of like the cameras are always on, so just get used to the idea that you might be being watched at any point in time. It's absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, that was Larry Ellison. Yeah,
Ellison, thank you.
that was Larry Ellison. That's at something called the World Government Summit. So who knew there was a thing called the World Government Summit? But there is, and that led by on that particular year, I think that was 2025 or 24, led by one Tony Blair, who Larry Ellison said, uh, we will be, everyone will have to be on their best behaviour because we will be watching everything you do. I mean, you just kind of think. I mean, one of the points that I point out in the work that I do, and why I sort of put so many links and references in it, is look, nothing I am saying is not in the public domain. This is already in the public domain, but you won't know about it because the BBC are not going to report this. The BBC are never going to report this, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just be, just because it's not on your TV or
Because it
not
doesn't
on
come
your
up as
main,
a
or you're not on
notification
your
on your
main.
BBC app on your phone doesn't mean it's not news.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
not news. Exactly,
I want to
exactly.
ask you actually about that, about Tony Blair. I was watching, it was Joe Rogan and Rupert Lowe the other day, and Rupert Lowe was talking about quangos, and I'd never heard this term before, which is quasi something NGOs in the UK. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
I can't remember what
yeah.
I can't remember what the A is. Maybe you remember. Um,
I can't. But
yeah,
yeah,
quangos, and it's sort of to me, I don't know if they fully gave this analogy, but it sort of sounded quite similar to Doge and what Elon Musk was trying to do with US aid and exposing corruption in the US. It seems like that's a big problem, and Tony Blair set up quite a few of these, and now there's like 450 of them in the UK, unelected bodies in the UK. um, Sort of like, is that has that been coming for a long time? Is that sort of a Tony Blair thing? Was that before?
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of this. No, I mean, it goes all the way back to this notion of the third way, doesn't it? That the Blair government pursued. But I mean, that goes back to people like thinkers like Amitai Etzioni, you spoke about, who, interestingly enough, came up with the term the new norm, which we all became very familiar with during COVID. So what they're talking about is a marriage between the public sector, the private sector, and what they call the third sector, which is civil society. So, you set up these NGOs, non-governmental organisations, that are supposed to play a part in the decision-making process. So you have this triumvirate of decision-making between the public, the private, and the third sector. Now, the idea being that instead of governments representing the people that elect them, which is supposed to be what they do. I mean, it isn't, but I mean, that is supposed to be what they do. Um, you have this kind of mechanism by which the voice of the public is heard through through civil society, through this NGO sector. And that would better reflect a more kind of responsive and adaptable kind of policy environment. But of course, that's not a lot of use if the NGOs are controlled by the same multinational corporations that run the private sector, which is the truth. That's what happens. So you get people like the Tony Blair Institute for Global Governance, um, that run their own NGOs, that fund them. Larry Ellison, funding the NGOs which represent the voice of the people, which is just pointless. It's just like, no, they don't. And one of the ways that the third way is, I mean, it's more than that. It's about public-private initiatives, PPIs, which is what the Blair government introduced into the NHS in order to bankrupt it. Um, but the point is that by controlling the decision-making process through the third way, you give the false impression of public engagement. It's not actually about real public engagement. And one of the most telling things is, now what was it called? I think there was a one of these kind of triumvirate kind of, this is very much the idea that came from Klaus Schwab as well during the 1970s, of stakeholder capitalism, of uh, global corporations being more responsible and taking their stewardship of the planet more seriously. So hang on a minute, who put Microsoft in charge? Right, when did that happen? Right? So, but it did. I mean, that's what stakeholder capitalism is supposedly all about. But but they so the idea is that, and an example that I wrote about, I think it was a debate about the green agenda. Oh, net zero. It was a public debate about net zero, where they'd got the representatives from the government at the time, which I think was probably the coalition government, because I'm going back a few years. Um, Representatives of the private sector that were going to, like the petroleum companies and these sort of people, and representatives from civil society, who would debate this agenda, this agenda, and come up with new policy ideas. You think, oh right, okay, so what are they going to debate? Well, what they're going to debate is whatever is put on the table for debate. So it's not like the question, should we adopt net zero to policies at all? That's not up for debate. The debate is how much should we adopt it? To what extent should we adopt it? How much money should we use to adopt these policies? The question of not adopting them is just not asked and not discussed. So the agenda is completely set by the public and the private sector. The so-called civil society's got no say in that. And then, because the civil society part of it needs to understand the issues, you have representatives from the public and the private sector who do workshops with them to tell them what they should think before the debate. So this is not in any way, shape, or form any kind of even pseudo-democratic process. It's just a way of rubber stamping whatever the public-private
Mm, mm,
partnership want.
mm.
That's all it is.
I'm going to have a quick toilet break and I want to come back and continue on that note. Just give me a minute. I'll be right back. We're back. Hope you
Hello.
enjoyed your vape.
Yeah,
What flavour have you got?
I feel satiated. Well, I make my own actually.
Make your own.
So it's there's a thing. Yeah, I make my own. There's a thing called Make My Vape. So you can buy the raw ingredients and make
Oh,
your own.
great. So you avoid all the nasty chemicals and things.
Mine's tobacco with a hint of hazelnut.
Oh, very nice. So what, it's all like natural. So you're not inhaling like just endless toxic.
Oh no, it's all completely toxic.
Good to be honest.
Nobody, more to the point, nobody even knows what the long-term health consequences of
Mm.
vaping are, because it hasn't been around long enough for anyone to do any long-term studies. So no
No,
one knows.
no. There was
So
a
I'm
good video
risking my life
for hazelnut.
for
Mm.
hazelnut.
All right, I'm going to get us back on topic a little bit. There was you were talking about sort of like the framing of the narrative, and there's a term I learnt, I think like a couple of days ago. It was called terms of reference, and I think it was used in the context of the Warren report for the JFK assassination. And it was the fact that they sort of framed the way that that the jury was going to look at the case. So that I think they'd actually even sectioned in the Warren report, they'd sectioned it out and titled things. So in a weird way, it sort of predetermined the questions that the jury should be asking based on what title they gave each section. So it sort of avoided the idea of multiple shooters or, I don't know, interference from another country or anything like that. And it seems to be, terms of reference is something that I sort of want to hold on to because it seems to be more and more prevalent nowadays. It's like how they wouldn't even question the lab leak hypothesis, right, in COVID. It was like it wasn't even a question, and they shut down dissent and debate from anyone who wanted that. And from what you said, what was the Barrington report?
The Great Barrington
Great,
Declaration.
yeah,
Yeah.
Great Barrington Declaration. It does feel like we're sort of slowly going further in that direction. There's a lot of people who sort of they reference Elon Musk and the way he bought X and sort of opened up freedom of speech again. I'm curious what you. Yeah, obviously there's this idea that yes, people like Mark Zuckerberg are using the freedom of speech thing for their own personal gain. I'm wondering if there's any redeeming qualities of any of the billionaires. Someone like Elon Musk, is there anything redeeming about him, or do you think it's all just a front to push his own agenda and make money? Or with X, like it does seem like there was
Yeah. No, there's
basically just finishing that question. Is there anything redeeming, or is it just a big front?
no, there's nothing redeeming about them, and yes, it's a big front. Well, they want to. I mean, Elon Musk personally is deeply, deeply committed to um, introducing technocracy, and technocracy is nothing other than a system of enslavement. That's all it is. It's about the centralized control of the distribution and allocation of all resources to every individual on Earth, and through that, you can utterly control their behavior. So we are seeing systems roll out which are precisely designed for that. So if we look at the way that digital identity would work, if we are crazy enough to go along with it, that will be linked to our access to everything. So that will be linked to our access to public services, but also to our access to finance, to our access to banking, to money, to transactions. So it is through your digital identity that total control of your behavior can be set, probably by agentic AI, and controlled. But agentic AI is not some autonomous kind of dispassionate logical system. It is a algorithm that's programmed by human beings with agendas like Elon Musk. So it's the control of the population. That is what's happening, and it's not like something else that I often stress, that I'm not talking about a hypothetical what if scenario. It is happening. They are introducing these systems. I mean, it is through government legislation. So we have things like the Online Safety Act, and in Europe you've got the digital DSA, whatever the I can't remember the name, the acronym for that either. But we've got this legislation rolling out. At the same time, we've got companies like X that are developing things like X Money, and Musk wants to make it into an everything app. Now, there's an everything app in Ukraine, which has arisen thanks to the Ukraine quote unquote war, which is called Dia, which is literally in Ukraine. That's referred to as the digital state. And through Dia, the only access the Ukrainians have got to public services, to registering births, deaths, marriages, to accessing, like grants, systems of grants, to getting benefits, it's all through Dia. It's all through this digital app, which can be controlled, and that's tied to their digital identities. So if you're a Ukrainian that let's say that you say, well, speak out and say, well, actually, I think the Russians have got a point, or something like that. Your access to your life will be determined by your programmable digital identity. Now, that is the system that Musk wants to turn X into. That's what he wants to turn it into. He's openly said about X money. He's openly said about X money that the purpose of it is to control the finances. I can't remember. I'm paraphrasing, but he said it is to control the finances of everyone, to control their finances. So, what sort of I mean, going back to a point you made earlier about, people say, well, I haven't done anything wrong. What have I got to fear? Right. Well, if you'd have asked a German in 1930 whether they thought they had anything to fear from their government, the Weimar Republic, they might have had various views on it, but they wouldn't have said, oh, I've got something to fear from it. No, I've got no problem, nothing to fear from it. But a decade later, or 2 decades later, they'd just gone through a world war, had been subjected to fascism, and half of them were now living under the rule of the Stasi, using the same system that they had nothing to fear. So the problem is with that approach, that argument that we've got nothing to fear from these control systems, is the absolutely groundless and frankly naive assumption that the systems that could be used for total tyrannical control of your life will never be used for that purpose. The point is, you wouldn't design a system that can be used to tyrannically control your life if the objective at some point wasn't to use it for that purpose. And quite clearly, the digital infrastructure that is being put in place at the moment, the surveillance, digital infrastructure, and particularly and this is the really big one in my view, the linking of digital ID to your finances, which controls everything that you can pay for. Down to money for your bills and your taxes being taken directly out of your digital wallet without your prior consent. That kind of control, that kind of power. You wouldn't design a system like that if you didn't want to use it for those purposes. It's totally antithetical to everything we think our societies are supposed to be. It's totally antithetical to that. And yet people are going along with it. They're going along with it. And that's the thing that, myself and other journalists that are of a similar view to me are constantly writing about. Why are we going along with this? Why are we accepting it? And someone like Musk is frankly dangerous. He's dangerous. So no, we shouldn't trust him. We've got no reason to trust him. Everything he does is contrary to our interests.
All right. Well, I mean, yeah, we've seen that. Obviously, we see that in China. There was the famous case that everyone references is Canada in COVID, right? The big truckers protest and how they shut down people's wallets and anyone related to them or close to them, so you couldn't even get money sent to you from your family because their bank accounts were shut down. It's absolutely terrifying. You've got Justin Trudeau, speaking to his fellow Canadians and saying that he admires Xi Jinping more than anyone else in the Chinese state and wanted to represent them. And luckily he's gone, but I don't know if Carney's really any better, maybe slightly. His hair's not as nice. Does feel like we're slightly shifting that direction. The one thing that I don't really understand this, and I keep hearing things from opposing perspectives, is I was not a fan of Brexit, but it does feel like what a lot of people are saying now. You hear it on GB News and things like that. That maybe it's not such a bad thing because we've moved away from this European centralization of currency. Obviously, the EU is a disaster. Ursula von der Leyen is an absolute nightmare. So I don't know if you think we're any better off. It seems like we're shifting towards digital ID in the UK anyway. I don't know if we're any better off because we're not in the European Union.
I don't think so. I mean, there's no, you couldn't put a cigarette paper between us and the European Union. It's the same. I mean, we're totally pursuing the same military unification. That's happening. When Brexit happened, I mean, I've got quite a lot of a time for the notion of Brino, Brexit in name only. Because, yeah, sure, we'd officially left and there were some slight structural differences and we didn't adopt the euro, but we didn't adopt the euro anyway. That goes, John Major got us out of that, his government didn't adopt the euro. So, I mean, it's not, whether that would have been, obviously that would have been required if we'd have stayed in the EU. So that's a problem. But I mean, there is no difference in policy, really. I mean, you could find a policy area where you look at digital surveillance, you look at the rollout of digital ID. I mean, if anything, because the EU Commission is more autocratic than anything we've got in the UK at the moment, we can look at the EU and think, well, that's where we're heading, but we're lagging behind because they've still got some sort of need in the gut in the UK to sort of kind of try and convince people that they need to adopt this stuff, usually by saying that the planet is on fire or we have to have a wartime, we have to get on a wartime footing to fight the Russians or something like that. Whatever excuse they use, whatever story they tell, there is still something of a need to convince populations in the UK in the population in the UK to go along with these harebrained schemes. Whereas in the EU they don't have that problem because the Commission just lays down a diktat and says this is what's going to happen. Which was a good reason to leave the EU because obviously, I mean, it's totally undemocratic. I mean, it's like there's no part of the. I mean, you look at what happens with, for example, Poland recently. Refused to ratify the Digital Services Act I remembered the name now. Digital Services in the EU. So what was the EU Commission's response to that? Oh well, we'll just get rid of national voting blocks. We'll just make it by majority vote across, and we will ascribe more votes to Germany and France because they've got a bigger population. So what Poland wants doesn't matter anymore. That is a typical EU response. That is what I mean, one of the interesting things about the European Union, one of the reasons that I did support Brexit, and it was one of the few times that I've actually voted in the Tony Blair killed me of voting in 1997. So I haven't voted since him. He put me off it for life. But but he, I did vote in the Brexit referendum purely and simply because of the fact that it was an opportunity for at least some decentralisation, at least a little bit of even if it was just token decentralisation. But that was I knew when I was doing it really that it was a waste of time, and it turned out to be that. But I mean, I won't fall for that again. But anyway, the the point being that the EU was set up in 1955 by a globalist oligarch group. The Bilderberg Committee set up the European Union. The Committee decided in 1955, they put a paper out where they said, we will have a European economic community which will progressively move to becoming a European political union, and we will do it through treaty rather than through, bilateral agreement or negotiated votes. We will do it through treaty. Now, they decided that in 1955. And lo and behold, if you look over the next 4 decades, that is exactly what happened. Now, nobody elected anyone to go and decide that there was going to be a continental union by decree, by treaty. I mean, look what happened when the Irish voted down the um, Lisbon Treaty. So the Irish voted against it, right? So what was the answer to that? Because the Bilderberg group decided 4 decades earlier that this was going to happen no matter what the people thought. At one point, D'Estaing was asked, about the Irish voting down the Lisbon Treaty, and he said, "What?" There's Valerie D'Estaing. He said, "Why should we care about them?" Right? Because they don't care what we think, only what we believe and what we do. If they can manipulate us into doing what they want, that's what they care about. So, with regard to the Irish just voting against it, the answer to that was simple, wasn't it? Well, we just keep asking the question until you say yes. When you say yes, that'll be the last vote. But until you say yes, we'll just keep asking the question. And whether the Irish, looking back at it now in retrospect, just thought, oh, what's the point? I think the last vote, something like 23% of the population voted in the last vote, because obviously and in the first vote, it was quite high. It was something like 62%. So by the time they got to the third vote, obviously the people have just thought, oh, what's the point? They're not going to stop until we agree. So I'm not going to vote for it. I just won't vote at all. And they just carry on regardless. And if the Irish people had stood against that for 10 decades, in 100 years' time, they'd still be
Mm.
holding that vote.
Yeah, it sort of puts my mind in I'm sort of reverting a little bit back to when you were talking about it doesn't really make a difference whether we're in the EU or not. The thing that I kind of see happening now is this shift towards a bigger war with Russia. It feels like, and I don't know what you. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. There's been a couple of drones that have gone into Poland. Doesn't really make any sense to me. It feels like it's another Nord Stream situation. Who blew up Nord Stream? The Russians. Of course, it was the Russians because they blew up their own pipeline to the rest of Europe.
Their own economic supply line, they
Yeah.
blew it up.
It doesn't make any sense to me that Russia would send a couple of drones into Poland to let the rest of Europe and America know that they're thinking of maybe invading Poland. It makes no sense. It seems like it was the Ukrainians or the Americans or something else to get everyone scared, to shock people into a war with Russia. It feels like that's the way we're heading. I don't understand. Yeah, curious
Yeah,
what you
yeah.
think about that.
There's some weird things about the Ukraine war. I mean, some very, very odd things. For a start, for 4 years of the war. So, for a start, the war started in 2014,
Yeah,
not 2022.
yeah.
That's when the war started. That's when the Ukrainian government started shelling its own population in the Donbass.
Mm,
That's when it
mm,
started. Right. So Russia entered a war that had been ongoing for 8 years in 2022. Now, regardless of what you think about the rights and wrongs of doing that, the point is that Russia observably did not start that conflict. It certainly escalated that conflict. Now, from that point onwards, for the first 4 years, 40% of the diesel that was used by Ukrainian forces for their military armour was coming from Russian Lukoil refineries in Bulgaria. Russia was supplying the oil to convert it and manufacturing the diesel to supply the Ukrainian military. Now, you could say, oh, well, I mean, the argument goes, oh, well, there were all these contracts in place and we couldn't renege on the contracts and they were private contracts. And now this is all rubbish. If you're in a war, of course, the government supposedly should be able to say, right, well, the first thing we're going to do is stop supplying the army with fuel, that our enemy with the fuel that they need. Well, we'll stop doing that. That's a bad idea in a war. Right. And then all the throughout up for about another 4 or 5 years throughout that conflict since 2022. It's only recently that the Russians stopped paying gas transit fees to the Ukrainian government for pumping its gas to EU customers, which and the EU sanctioned Russia, and the Russians are supplying it with gas to keep it afloat. Right, so none of this makes any sense. I mean, another thing, a weird thing. I don't know whether you recall, but a couple of weeks into that conflict, Russia had surrounded the capital. Russia had taken the whole of the country and had surrounded the capital. Right now, now there were negotiations, obviously, that followed, and the story we are supposed to believe is that Russia was hoodwinked, basically, by the German and the British government. That they thought that there was an agreement in place, but oh no, it turns out that the Germans and the British were tricking them,
Mm.
tricking them.
It's like Boris
Now, I mean,
Johnson
the
went in,
idea
and I don't remember exactly what happened there, but Boris Johnson
Boris Johnson,
supposedly
yeah, he goes in
quashed it. Yeah.
and convinces the Ukrainians to fight on. Whether the Ukrainians decided to fight on or not is neither here nor there. Russia had surrounded Kiev. The Ukrainians couldn't find it. They'd got control of all their energy infrastructure. The Russians have total air superiority. The Ukrainian Air Force has got no chance of providing its forces with any kind of meaningful air cover. Russia has got total air superiority, which it never used. It didn't use its air superiority. Now, you have to look at a conflict and that like that and go, how can you call that a war? How can you? I mean, obviously, this is the point. It obviously is a war. 1.5 million people have died, estimates have died in horrific circumstances. It's an attrition. It's almost like a World War I trench warfare attritional battle. But instead of being shot by machine guns going over the top, you're shot by drones that are flying at you from 20
Robot
miles away.
dogs. Yeah.
Robot dogs and drones. So who is benefiting from all this? Well, funny you should say that. It's companies like Palantir and Anduril that are developing their weapon
Mm.
systems, using that conflict to develop their weapon systems, which they then work hand in hand with the Israeli government to commit a genocide in Gaza.
Mm.
So the whole thing sucks. The whole narrative sucks. But from a European perspective, you talk about drones falling in, missiles falling on Polish territory. Yeah, and that's happened throughout the conflict. I mean, I remember missile strikes. I mean, the argument is that it's stray missile strike, and I remember initially, I think this was in about 2023, there was a missile strike that landed in Polish territory, and the Ukrainians immediately said it was the Russians. But when people looked into it, it actually turned out it was the Ukrainians. Now, the Ukrainians almost certainly didn't do it deliberately. It was literally a stray, poorly targeted strike that went wrong. But nonetheless, the propaganda that you get, the fog of war, is so thick that you can't see through it, because there's what we are told about what's happening is when you dig into it, is nothing like the reality that is actually playing out. And Poland is obviously the Polish government is probably the most anti-Russian government in Europe. I mean, it's fiercely anti-Russian for obvious historical reasons, right? So I would be very wary of anything that comes out of the Polish government saying that, oh, Russia are trying to launch an attack on Europe. I mean, Europe for Russia is an incredibly valuable trading partner. It's a market for the Russian economy it floats on energy exports. It's an energy exporting country. So it doesn't want to destroy Europe. It doesn't want to attack Europe. It wants a trading relationship with Europe. But what's happened because of the Ukraine war and the sanctions and the tariffs and everything and things like blowing up Nord Stream, which the only people that have been arrested for that are Ukrainians, by the way. Um, the is that Russia has been trading more with China, with India, with Gulf Cooperation Council countries. It is trading more with its international partners. So, and the other result of that is that Europe is now reliant upon energy supplies from the US. So Europe is like in the middle of this conflict, or this certainly this geopolitical to and fro. Russia's realigning all of its financial systems, it's realigning all its business arrangements, it's realizing all its trade with its Eurasian and Asian partners and looking away from Europe because I mean it's still selling energy products to Europe. I mean, but it's certainly obviously it's from a Russian perspective, they can't rely on that now. So it makes sense for them to look eastward. And Europe is looking to the US. So the US, which is providing. I mean, and this is another point, providing just enough military support to Ukraine for it to continue to fight, not to win, for it to continue to fight. That's why Zelensky's always on his global money raising tours and weapons raising tours, trying to get more and more and more weapons because they haven't quite got enough to win. And they're just drip fed enough money and enough. I mean, obviously at the expense of everybody else. I mean, obviously, like European taxpayers are paying for it and American taxpayers are paying for it. So it's at our expense financially. But Ukraine is supported to hobble through the conflict, to keep the conflict going. Similarly, weird things in Russia. Russian mainland territory is being regularly hit with weapons supplied to Ukraine by NATO. NATO is providing weapons, missiles, that are hitting targets in mainland Russia. So Russia has, at least from a logical and kind of geopolitical and maybe kind of even legal standpoint, a legitimate cause for war, global war with Europe and the United States.
100%. It's the analogy I always give is, was it, I want to say it was 11 CIA bases that were on the border of Ukraine and Russia within Ukraine. And so people go, well, obviously they broke all their agreements post Cold War. And if you'd had 11 Russian bases on the border of Mexico and America, America would have absolutely lost their minds. So it's the exact same thing. I want to shift a little bit because to sort of quote Orwell, we've spoken about Oceania and Eurasia. I want to shift to East Asia. The ever peaceful China. I heard you talk about this the other day. China's got this. It doesn't actually matter what news you read. China's got this beautiful outlook that they're incredibly peaceful. They don't go to wars with other countries. They're just looking for peaceful trade. And yes, it's a multipolar world that we're shifting towards, but they don't have a long colonial history like Europe does. China's actually much better in the way they negotiate trade with other countries. And I heard you, I don't know where he was from. I think it was a South African gentleman, some podcast you were on recently, and you were talking about China's interest in, well, I guess everyone's interest in Africa and Africa's resources, and how China is not using the IMF and the World Bank, but they've basically got their own version of this.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit and how China's sort of delving into this.
Yeah, so I mean the BRICS alignment, which was created, as a concept by Goldman Sachs, Jim O'Neill from Goldman Sachs, way back in 1999 or something around there, um, has got its own development banks. NDB being one of them, it's got its own development banks, and they are looking to roll out the same kind of technology, which the UN calls frontier technology. So that's the surveillance technology that I was talking about earlier. So this is, the linking of data from the Internet of Things. So your fridge, everything from your fridge to your car to everything, all transmitting data to centralized databases that are controlled by things like AI, agentic AI, and that's all linked to your digital identity. So that's what the UN calls frontier technology, and all the surveillance cameras and the digital surveillance and put in, which the British obviously at the moment want to do. They want to put surveillance technology, or rather, they want to force operating system providers to use the surveillance technology capabilities that are already in their operating systems, Apple and Google and so forth, and Android. So that's what the British government are doing, to force us to do at what they call age verification, which actually means that we'll have to submit our digital identities to use the internet. So that's all countries are doing it, not just China. And this is something that I keep trying to stress. Although I have criticised the rollout of technocracy in China in particular, the only reason I've done that is because that's where it's advanced the most to date. Because from the in the post-war period, China has had a tremendous amount of foreign direct investment as groups like the Rockefellers and the wider kind of partnership of Western multinational corporations and the oligarchs that are behind them have been trialing technocracy in China. There's no doubt about that. The Chinese government is fairly open about that. The Chinese government's 2014 announcement of its social credit system is avowedly technocratic. It's just it's they. This is the point that one of the criticisms that I get from people sometimes is that there's no such thing as a social credit system in China. Well, that is just absurd. The, you've got like CGTN, which is Chinese state media, keeps putting out reports about the advantages of the Chinese social credit system, right? So but I think where people get wrong is that, and where the criticism comes, that when those of us that are critical of what is happening in China, is that we're not suggesting that China is some sort of despotic totalitarian outlier, and that it's somehow worse than every other government in the world. It isn't. It's the same. That's the point. It's the same as every other government in the world. It's just that China happens to be the place, or one of the places, because we can now look at countries in Europe like Estonia and Ukraine, which are trialing exactly the same thing. The same thing is happening in the United Arab Emirates. They're going over, they want 50% of their government to be run by agentic AI by 2030.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they've got like the different AI sort of assistants, right? I can't remember her name, but she's sort of a goddess woman AI, and she's going to give birth to something like 200
Mm.
AI babies, and each MP over there is going to have their own AI assistant, and they're slowly going to shift towards. That's
Mm.
right. Yeah, yeah. Crazy
So they
stuff.
want, which is exactly what but the point is, in China, the rollout of this technology through a network of special economic zones and smart city developments is on a scale that is unprecedented. They've got a project called the Greater Bay Area, which is going to link all these special economic zones together, with a single kind of unified transport corridor, and energy corridor and everything, linking all these special economic zones together, creating what you could call a technate that is where 80 controlling the lives of 86 million Chinese people. So that is the biggest experiment ever in technocratic governance. That is, and China openly declare that that's what they're doing. So now there are different mindsets in China that are, the public have got a very different concept of what government should be. So they believe in this notion of the Great Way. They've got these ideas like Tianxia, and that it's not so much about, that government kind of should be unseen. It's kind of just a bureaucratic structure that enables them to run their daily lives. So they're not invested in political decision making in the way that we have been encouraged to invest in it in the West. So it makes sense to trial a system like that in China, which is evidently why so many Western multinational corporations and banks have been investing in China to enable them to trial it. They have been trialing it. So when we talk about, for example, the multipolar world order, which is this notion that on the plus side, it's a regional balance of power structure, and there's not supposed to be any dominant superpowers in it, no dominant economies, no dominant um, reserve currency, for example. It's more balanced system, and the idea is that you would have more engagement with from all countries in this system, and that it will reduce the likelihood of imperialistic wars like we're currently seeing in Iran. So there are benefits to it, and I can understand from people that support it why they would see potential benefits in it. But it is a system of global governance. It's an openly declared system of global governance. That it's called the multipolar world order, and because it is a world order, right? So if you're arguing for it because it's better than what we've got, you are essentially arguing for a world order. Personally, I'm not up for that. I think that's a very, very, very bad idea. So that's why I'm opposed to it. But if we look at how that plays out, so in China, they've got a thing called civil military fusion. In these special economic zones, where they're melding the development of civil or private sector research and development with military development, or dual use technology. So through dual use technology that China is spreading around the world to, for example, Saudi Arabia, and although Iran officially isn't part of this, if you look at Iran's Shahed drones, they are identical to Chinese drones. Now we know how Chinese hardware that is coming from these state subsidized manufacturing hubs in the special economic zones in China, how they are winding their way into places like Sudan. So the UAE, United Arab Emirates, that is going to this 50% quote unquote invisible government by 2030, has got these special economic zones which encourage private enterprise, where third party sellers of Chinese weapons are setting up business and supplying that to the combatants in the civil war in Sudan. So that is win-win cooperation, as the supporters of Chinese multipolarity would call it, in operation. It's the secret supplying of arms to trouble spots in this case Sudan, where China is offering to provide the investment and the loans to rebuild infrastructure that will be controlled by Chinese corporations once the destruction has ended. So it's the same gunboat diplomacy, but just done perhaps more intelligently and more cunningly and with a smile, but it's the same. It's the same. So, a world a multipolar world might very well reduce the likelihood of large scale kinetic warfare. I mean, that is the hope. And I think that's a reasonable hope. I think, and we're seeing that, for example, with the Trump administration. I mean, it's total disaster that it has committed itself to in Iran, which it is now trying to, despite all the grandstanding and the rhetoric about, ramping up. Yes, I mean, it's obviously trying to extricate itself from it if it can. Um, it's that is obviously coming at the same time that the Trump administration is saying that it wants to reduce its relationship with NATO, reduce its funding. It's more and more isolationist. It wants to withdraw from all these international agreements. So I think we might be looking at the last kind of major international imperialist war. I think it's this might be the death knell of that. But what the multipolar world order is based upon is what they call the disaggregation of hegemony, which is removing dominant power structures. And also that means, because of things like civil military fusion that are happening in China, the cost of war is coming down remarkably. The Saudi Arabian government has already noted that I think it's $5 billion THAAD missile defense system can be destroyed by a swarm of $20,000 Shahed drones. Right? So you could destroy multi-billion-dollar infrastructure, well, for pennies on the dollar. Right? So that is the effect of civil military fusion that is happening in China, the dissemination globally of dual use technology and manufacturing arrangements in places like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and places like that. So we're not seeing the end. We won't see the end of war. I think what we'll see is a changing face of war, a more technological kind of war, a cheaper model of war, and because it's cheaper, more people will be able to be involved in it. It puts war into the the hands of groups like ISIS. So during the during the Syrian conflict, ISIS only got its military power from the US military equipment and tanks and Humvees and all that sort of stuff that were given to it in places like Fallujah, which is obviously what happened. But the US left divisions of armor, abandoned them. Well, the Iraqi army abandoned them. And allowed ISIS to just take it. So ISIS went from a terrorist organization to a fully equipped army because it got all its kit, all the guns, all the fuel, all the tanks and the armored vehicles and the anti-aircraft missiles was just left for them in the middle of the desert. Right? So that's how that happened. Now ISIS couldn't have afforded that. They couldn't have bought that stuff. They couldn't afford it. But now, with the way that multipolar win-win cooperation works, is that groups like ISIS, I'm just using this as an example, but groups like ISIS can afford to equip themselves as an army because the technology is cheaper.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and the fact that ISIS in Syria is now suddenly friends with the US and is visiting the White House, and we're talking about agreements with ISIS, and it's like we're told that they are the enemy, they're the worst people on the planet until they're not. Until actually, no, now they're running a country and they're kind of who we wanted in power anyway, so we sort of respect them.
Uh, it's unbelievable. I mean, from the start. I mean, you can. I mean, this is going back to another point about there's no difference, right? But so currently, you've got the Trump administration shaking hands with Al Jilani, and who was the head of Harriet Tarrant Ilsham, I probably mispronounced that, HTS, who were formerly Al Nusra Front, who were formerly Al Qaeda. So he is an Al Qaeda military commander, and he's now president, quote unquote president of Syria, and he's obviously not. He's obviously a Western puppet, right? And now that happened. That whole conflict happened under the auspices of the Obama administration. It was the Obama administration that was supporting Al Nusra Front and giving them weapons and then equipping ISIS. That was the Obama administration. So it makes no difference. I mean, then the Biden administration did the same, and now the Trump administration is doing it. So it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any difference who you vote for. It doesn't makes no difference whatsoever.
Yeah, what was it? It was the other day I saw that because of some law in the US where you're only allowed to have a military operation or a war in another country for like 60 or 90 days without congressional approval, they basically announced a new war with Iran, which was different from the previous war with Iran. And because it's a new
Yeah, yeah,
war, they
yeah,
technically can't shut it down and it just carries on.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of kind of shenanigans that go on with that kind of stuff. I mean, that's not just the Americans. I mean, the British do it.
Yeah.
Everybody does it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is another point about quote unquote international law, which, the Chinese are always going on about how that the system of international law with the UN at its heart is the thing that we need to strengthen, and that needs to be better. International law doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless. I mean, you look at the ICC warrant for Netanyahu. So the ICC have got a warrant for Netanyahu. Does anybody really think that Benjamin Netanyahu will ever be held to account by any international criminal court? Of course, he might. I tell you what, he might one day, long after he's left office, when he's on his deathbed, they'll probably bring some retrospective prosecution against him and go, see, we're holding him to account. But not while he's got functional power. That'll never happen. It's a charade. It's a total charade.
Yeah, there's that really good. No,
But
sorry, go ahead.
no, carry on.
I was going to say there's that fantastic Noam Chomsky video you might have seen. It's like 10 minutes on YouTube. And he basically goes through and rattles off every single president and lists the international war crimes that they've committed and will never be charged for.
Yeah, I mean and yet we give this stuff credence. We give it credence. And the same is true with the political decision-making process. We give that credence as if it makes a difference. I mean, currently in the UK, everyone's talking about the possibility of reform being the next government, right? Well, so what? I mean, reform is backed by the same technological oligarchs that are backing the Trump administration. You know, I mean, if they're in charge, it won't make any difference. The British people might think that they will tackle immigration. Well, probably they might tinker around at the edges, but the process of shifting populations around the world is a UN global governance initiative. It's a global governance initiative. They've written papers on managing population shifts. So, well, and obviously, if you bomb a country or reduce its economy to ashes, people are going to leave. I mean, and look,
Shocking.
shocking. How? What? Why? I mean, so. But I mean, I suppose what my frustration from my perspective and why I write about the stuff I do, and I sometimes do it. It does make. I mean, some of it is so appalling that it makes me want to cry. But then I kind of think, if you don't laugh at this stuff, you'll go mad. So I do try and put a bit of humour in it, just to point out the absurdity of it all.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you have to. I think after a while, what I say to everyone, and my big shift was COVID. That was when I sort of changed my perspective on everything because I sort of followed all the mask mandates and I got my jabs, and then I was like, wait, there's something not right here, and then I completely just flipped 180 the other direction. And the constant running joke I have with my partner is if my close friends knew half of what I actually believe, they'd think we're secret Nazis or something. There's that card game called Secret Hitler, which is essentially, it's like werewolf, those card games with someone's a werewolf and they kill people at night, and then you need to vote on who you think the werewolf is, right? There's
no, I don't know that way. Yeah.
That's sort of a game. There's one called Secret Hitler that my sister plays, and it's like someone would think we're Secret Hitler
Right.
if they knew what we actually believed. But you do get bits of entertaining stuff as well. There's this whole thing with Nigel and Count Binface that's going on at the moment, which is you got to have fun every now and then.
Yeah, well, you've got to have fun. Why not? I mean, I mean, that's a lot of this stuff. I mean, I argue quite often that, when you see things like him re-standing for election because he's basically trying to avoid answering any more questions about the money that he's been bunged by American AI technologists, right? So, when he wasn't a politician. I mean, the whole argument, I mean, is so absurd, isn't it? You can get someone gives you 5 million quid, no strings attached. I mean, oh, what, like a Christmas present? He opened it in a little box under the Christmas tree. Oh, thank you very much, American AI development czar. But I obviously don't have to do anything at all in return for the vast amount of money you've
No,
just
they
given
never,
me
no,
for no
never speak to each
reason.
other ever again. It's ridiculous.
It is totally ridiculous, and it is comical. But I mean, but also what makes me laugh is that the media will run through it and give it credence. They'll say, well, Farage has put forward this point of view, and Farage has said that this happened, and then you get very serious people debating about the constitutional implications of whether or not he got the money outside of his sphere of influence when he was not an MP, therefore blah 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 blah. And you just think, what? And let's just ignore the obvious point that he's been bought. let's just ignore
Mm,
that.
mm. It's like when I got the
I mean, it's just
yeah, I saw the
ridiculous.
news. What was it, a couple of weeks ago that I want to say the head of the BBC or the head of some department at the BBC resigned over bias, and I was like, wow, the BBC is bias. Could have never imagined.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, one interesting thing I did notice with the BBC, I don't very often watch it. I'm sometimes when I visit my in-laws, they are avid BBC watchers, and I normally can't even sit through the news without feeling like I'm going to explode. But
Yeah,
I, but I, but I, but I, I saw something on the news the other day, and it was about the heat wave.
yeah.
And I was aware, and I've written about in the past when the BBC had an official policy of not even acknowledging what they called quote unquote climate
Mm.
denial. They had an official policy for that, right? So basically, there will be no debate. It's science, but undebatable science, which of course is not science. That's the opposite of science. All science is debatable. That's practically the definition of science. But anyway, leaving that aside, they had an official policy where they would not mention what they call climate denial. And on this report about the heat wave, um, they mentioned it. They said, and obviously people will say that this isn't caused by climate, isn't caused by human induced warming, blah blah blah. I was like, oh, right, okay. At least they're acknowledging it. And I have noticed a narrative shift away from the sort of peak climate alarm that we get. It's still there. We still get a lot of it. But I would say that there has been a bit of a notable shift away from, and a little bit more of, in the media, the controlled media, a little bit more of a kind of open-minded approach towards at least discussing things like the economic impact of something like net zero policies. That seems to be something that people are talking about. And so you wonder why. So my initial thought when I see stuff like that is why? Why are they changing that now? Well, it's quite obvious. They need more energy for the data centers. They have to have more energy. They're not going to power data centers with windmills and sun panels. That is not going to work. They need a stable and vast supply of energy. And that's not going to come from the only sources for that work are fossil fuels and nuclear. So so hence the global, the world is on fire narrative, although the UN are still gung ho on it, um,
Mm.
is shifting
Yeah, and
because
the
of those
irony has never
reasons.
escaped me that Britain somehow has never talked about the fact that Britain has never looked at a map of the world and seen how big they actually are in comparison to every other country, let alone China, that's pumping out another. 100 coal plants like every day or something like that, and somehow talks about net zero. Like
Yeah,
even if we actually did go net zero, like it would make any difference on the world scale whatsoever. It's absolutely ridiculous.
yeah. I mean, an interesting thing, if you look at the Chinese energy usage statistics, is sure the percentage of energy that they've got that they get from renewable energy has increased significantly. They've definitely stepped up the introduction of renewable energy into their grid
Mm,
structure. So I think it's gone from something like I think at around 2000 it was virtually nothing, and it's gone up to about 15-20% of their total
mm,
energy
right.
consumption. So they have dramatically increased their and that's why you get all these stories saying China is building more wind farms and more solar farms than any other country in the world,
Mm,
which is
mm.
true. It is. But, but its total energy consumption has
Mm,
quadrupled, right? And 40% of it, 50% of it is coming from fossil fuels. So that means that although it's increased its renewable energy infrastructure considerably, more than any other country in the world, which is the bit that they keep reporting about, it's also increased its use of fossil fuels more than any country, more than any country in the world,
mm, mm.
markedly so. So it's all nonsense. The stuff that we're given about these narratives that we're given
Yeah,
are junk.
I was living in Glasgow over the. I lived in Glasgow for a few years, and I was there over COP26. Right, so I got to see Greta Thunberg give a speech, which was just the most useless speech I think I've ever seen in my entire life. Um, my my girlfriend at the time was working in a cafe, so I went to hang out with her, and I got chatting. This woman sat down across from me, and she just so happened to be the head of an organization called the IPPNW. I can't remember what it stands for, but they were the major organization that rioted and rallied against nuclear power stations in Germany. And at the time, I thought that was great. I was like, wow, you shut down the nuclear. And then look how great that turned out for Germany with the Ukraine war and everything that's happened. It's completely fallen apart. The thing that I don't understand, because it seems idiotic to me, is the unlinking of how amazing nuclear power is with very left liberal people who are on the green agenda and talking about climate change. I don't understand why people are so terrified of nuclear energy, because it seems like it's the only legitimate like way that we could, if we really want to talk about energy, and maybe even just shifting away from dependence on Russian and American Venezuelan oil. Why aren't we talking about like more small nuclear power plants? And I think actually Rolls Royce is developing one in the UK.
Yeah, no, Rolls Royce have, yeah. Yeah, and I think that they're called small form nuclear reactors, and Rolls Royce have built a kit. It's a kit, uh, like you could buy the kit and erect it wherever you want to erect one. So yeah, these small form nuclear reactors are definitely the way to go. Again, China, a lot of their special economic zones are putting in these small form nuclear reactors for local energy resources. So yeah, of course it makes. I mean, China reportedly is very close to kind of making nuclear fission a um, a reliable energy source, which would be a massive, massive game changer. Because obviously the energy input is so much less than it
I
is
think
for
it's a
any
lot
other.
less
I mean,
waste
the
produced as
amount of
well
energy
from fission, if I understand. Yeah.
you a lot less waste.
Mm,
Yeah, a lot less waste. Much more. Just better,
mm,
just a better form of energy. So sure. I mean, and obviously people's objections to it are things like the
mm.
disposal of the waste and the potential for, another Chernobyl or something like that. But realistically, if people want to reduce, I mean, one of the points I always point out with the green agenda and especially with regard to climate change, is that personally, I think, renewable energy cannot work as a centrally controlled energy source because it's intermittent and unreliable. So you couldn't run a grid using renewable energy. You could run your house You could a set of battery banks in your house and a wind turbine and a few panels. You could certainly run your house potentially. In fact, I know someone that's done precisely that. A friend of mine, Richard D. Hall, his house is completely off grid in the middle of a town. So renewable energy is not necessarily a bad idea, but of course the way they're deploying it is not so that it, because I mean, what would that achieve if we all went down the renewable energy road? We would be achieving independence from the grid, which is not what they want. What they want is us all to be dependent upon a centralized energy supply. So renewable energy doesn't work. The kind of model of renewable energy that they're putting out. So it's not that renewable energy itself is a bad idea. It is the model that they are using for renewable energy that is a bad idea. But certainly, if you want to power things like factories, you can't do it with renewable energy because it's intermittent. But you can do it with small form nuclear reactors. If you could power every town could have its own small form nuclear reactor. Now, the problem with that is, again, you're decentralizing control over the energy system. Because what's to stop a local community getting the money together? Because they're relatively inexpensive in terms of, they're compared to building a power station, a traditional um, um,
Power
power,
plant. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
traditional fossil fuel power station, they are relatively inexpensive. So what's to stop, a city saying, well, we won't bother with the grid infrastructure as it is, the getting power from buying it from
Mm.
E-Energy over in France. We'll
Yeah.
just build our
Yeah.
own.
Mm.
They don't want that. They don't want that. They want a centralized system. So you're quite right. The green lobby's objections to nuclear power make no sense if they are concerned about this theoretical man-made global warming. And one of the points I point out to people that are concerned about it is, personally, I don't believe that. I think anthropogenic global warming as a scientific theory is fundamentally flawed. But whether I believe it or not, or whether you believe it or not, is neither here nor there. Because the solution to it, let's say you're right. Let's say that the problem is CO2 in the atmosphere. None of the solutions to it actually address that problem. None of them. They're all about the centralization of control over energy supplies. That's got nothing to do or creating new global
Mm.
markets,
Yeah.
i.e., carbon
Yeah.
credit
Which have been
trading.
proven not to work as well.
It's got
Yeah.
nothing
Carbon
to
capture.
do. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
got nothing to do with
Mm.
addressing the problem that
Mm.
you say exists. It
Yeah,
doesn't
I actually
address that
forget that carbon
problem.
capture and carbon credits are two different things. And carbon capture has been shown not to work, but carbon credits is literally just the best analogy I can give for a carbon credit is we were in London and this was like a year ago, and you get the double decker buses that are bright lime green, and it says this bus is fully renewable. And my partner was like, "Wow, it's fully renewable," and I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about? They just pay off. It's running on diesel." It's just a green bus, which probably cost more and used more of the Earth's resources to paint it green instead of red, which it already was. And they just pay off their carbon credits. They're not stopping the usage of carbon. They're just saying they're good. It's like Apple. You get billboards that are like, we're the most renewable company. It's like, how? You got like child slaves in China building iPhones using the same amount of energy production. You got
Yeah,
cobalt mines in Africa, African child slaves. It's like
yeah.
what? Yeah.
What are you talking about? Yeah, I mean, what I said to my brother, well, my erstwhile brother-in-law, I said, they're all into their electric vehicles, right? They're EVs, right? So he calls it an electric vehicle. I said, okay, but it's not an electric vehicle, is it? It's a gas-fired power station vehicle. And he said, no, it isn't. I said, why? He says, because we all our energy is on a green tariff. We live in London, and all our energy is on a green tariff. I said, I'll tell you how a green tariff works. So your energy provider probably buys carbon credits from a company
Mm.
like Drax that are importing wood chips from Canada by
Yeah.
cutting down
Yeah.
forests in Canada, burning it in highly inefficient the Drax. I think the Drax bioenergy or biofuel power station is the single biggest emitter of CO2 in Britain
Mm.
because it's burning wood instead of coal, which is highly
Yeah.
inefficient, right? To create a pittance of energy, but it is accruing a hell of a lot of carbon credits. So then your energy provider will have a carbon exchange system. So your energy provider is probably buying their energy from a gas-fired power station in France and doing a credit swap, a carbon credit swap, to then claim that it has this special green tariff that you then have to pay a premium for to put energy into your electric vehicle, which is actually causing more CO2 pollution than a
Mm.
petrol
Mm.
car.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so so so, but of course, yeah, no, it's because we want
Yeah.
to save the planet.
Yeah. I've
I said,
got
all
an
right,
uncle who he lives in America, and he was driving across the country, and went to a stop somewhere, petrol station somewhere. There was a Tesla, I guess, charging station. So they had a bunch of Tesla chargers, and he heard this massive buzzing. There was a big hill behind this, and he had this big buzzing. He was like, "What is that?" And he looked over the hill and realized that all the Tesla chargers were plugged into a diesel power station. And he's like, "Oh, okay, right." Mm,
yeah,
just
yeah,
tucked
that
around the
makes
corner.
sense. I noticed the idea with nearly every wind turbine has got a diesel motor in it to start it.
And the fact that they're just bird murderers left, right, and center, just absolutely destroying.
Bird
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
murderers, yeah, bird
All right.
murderers.
Well, I want to sort of round off by, I guess, reverting a little bit back to what we were talking about in the beginning. Protest isn't the most helpful when it comes to government, but when it comes to decentralization and action, what are some positive? Because we've talked about enough negative things today. What are some positive
Yeah, yeah,
things that
yeah.
we can sort of try or look to, or how can we change anything?
Well, I'm very glad you put that because I'm actually doing a speaking tour soon. It's called the A Home for Lewis speaking tour. And myself, Richard D. Hall, Andrew Johnson, and Danielle and Lloyd Bryant are going on a national speaking tour where we will be talking about solutions. So what we're going to be talking about the things that we can do and looking at it from all different perspectives, looking at it from so Richard's going to be talking about some of the advances in physics that we could use, some of the things that you and I have just been talking about. Um, Andrew's going to be talking about some of this kind of psychology and spirituality that will enable us to live more independent lives. Daniel and Lloyd will be looking at it from the health perspective, and I'm going to be looking at it from kind of the practical day-to-day things that we could do. For example, using different operating systems like graphene. If you're going to have a smartphone, personally, I haven't got a smartphone. I've got a dumb phone, and sales of dumb phones have gone through the roof. So obviously, a lot of people are moving to dumb phones, which is good because obviously, if you haven't got access to the operating system, there's not much point putting digital surveillance on it if you're not using it. But if you are going to use, if you need, and I totally understand that some people need a smartphone for things like their business. So for that, you can use other operating systems such as Graphene or Linux-based systems. You don't have to use Android. You don't have to use Apple, right? So there are technological solutions that we could use. There are also socio-political things that we could do. So, we could start building voluntary communities where, that are based on voluntarist principles, which means that, we don't have a centralized bureaucracy ruling our lives. We could use technology in a completely different way. That just because we're being forced to adopt technology in a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that the technology itself is bad. It's the fact that it is centrally controlled and exploited by people who want to use it for those purposes. We don't have to use it for those purposes. There are many different things. I mean, one thing we've just spoken about there, renewable energy. If we decentralize and if we invest money in, instead of buying a £40,000 electric vehicle, spend £20,000 on getting your house off grid. Move your house off grid, if you can. If you've got enough space, if you've got a bit of a garden and you've got a roof, then you can be done. I mean, Richard's done an excellent video, which you can check out at his website, Rich Planet, where he shows how he has moved his house off grid,
Great. Great.
right? So there's lots of things that we can do to stand up to what is coming at us down the pipeline. But, what we can't do and expect to thrive, or more importantly, probably our children to thrive, is accept everything that is going on around us. If we just passively
Mm.
accept it, we're
Mm.
screwed.
Yeah, that's great. Could you please remind me one more time and the listeners what the name of that tour is?
It's called the A Home for Lewis tour, and the website to go to for get the tickets. It's a national tour. It's going on for 2 weeks. And the place to get the tickets is all one word, all lowercase, ahomeforlewis.org. That's all one word, lowercase, ahomeforlewis.org. And the purpose that we're doing it is because Richard D. Hall, some of your listeners might be aware, lost a civil case. There's now a purchase agreement order on his property. He's been made bankrupt, so there's a chance that he could be made homeless, and he's the sole parent for his 11-year-old son Lewis. So this has got nothing to do with Lewis. And whatever you think about the case, which, I mean, I think the case was one of the most appalling travesties of justice I've ever seen. Unbelievable what happened in his case. Well, for example, he wasn't allowed to offer a defence, so that's pretty big. Um, so, um, he's been made bankrupt as a result. The likelihood that he will lose his home, which means Lewis will lose his home. So what we are trying to do is raise money to safeguard Lewis, an 11-year-old boy, to safeguard his future and to ensure that he has the life opportunities that he deserves and they're not taken off him by the state. Now, he's, one of the points that I've got an article coming out in the Light newspaper where I discuss this. Lewis is just one child, and children suffering at the hands of the British state is what it does. It's what it does. It doesn't care about our children. It treats our children appallingly, and all these rubbish stories that it comes up with saying that it is introducing all these measures to keep children safe. It's not. If it wanted to keep children safe, it would put paedophiles in prison instead of letting them out. It would prosecute and secure convictions for organised paedophile gangs. It wouldn't claim that the only people that are organising paedophile operations are Muslims, because they're not the only people that are doing this. This is a national, international, global industry. It needs to be broken apart. The British government is not doing anything about that. It's doing nothing about it. So to say that it cares about the welfare of children, which is why we therefore all have to submit to digital ID, is just a lie that it is using. It's a propagandist lie. So sadly, children are abused by the British state all the time. But that's no reason why we need to stand by and let it happen to a little 11-year-old boy who lives in Wales. We don't have to allow that. We don't have to let that happen. And I hope people will come along. It's going to be a laugh. They'll get to see some of us talk on some interesting topics. We're going to have a bit of a
Mm.
laugh, and it's all in a very, very good
Great,
cause.
great. I'm looking forward to it. Can you please let people know as well where they can check out your website and your work?
Yeah, my website is all lowercase, all one word, iaindavis.com. My name's spelled IAIN Davis.com. I also write for on Substack at iaindavis.substack.com. And I also write for a number of outlets, including Unlimited Hangout, Geopolitics and Empire, Off Guardian. So normally, if you go into a decent search engine, maybe use DuckDuckGo or something like that, and put in although DuckDuck,
Uh,
oh, don't get me into that.
Brave's the way to go
Then
for now.
Brave, yeah, Brave, DuckDuckGo, yeah, whatever, yeah, but not Google. And put in Iain Davis, I'm sure you'll find my work.
Great, amazing. This has been a really lovely conversation. I feel like we've just kind of hit on everything. Just bashed it out in 2 hours.
Oh, it's been good. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
enjoyed it. It's been very good.
Cheers. Yeah.